Well, hey, welcome back to the X Podcast. We're so glad to have you joining with us, whether you're on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're watching or listening from. And today I've got my good friend and co-host, Russ. We should call this the More Podcast.
More or less.
More.
There's more or less.
More or less. Am I more and you're less? Or
I just
more or less. More or less.
Fun fact: when I was running for student council president in 5th grade, that was my campaign slogan.
More or less.
Do you want more or less?
Do you want more or you want less?
It's kind of an indictment to my competitors.
Well, welcome to the X Podcast, a.k.a. the More or Less Podcast. We are not related, by the way.
No, we're not.
At least that we know.
Nepotism is not.
This is not nepotism.
You told me for 5 seconds. You're like, I have to spend my life with you.
Yes.
That came out weird.
Wait. Did you just say that I'm spending my life with you?
Work with me.
Oh, work. So welcome. This is my work wife, Russ Moore. Anyways,
yep.
So fascinating thing just happened recently. I don't know if you saw this. Elon Musk is trying to take over the world.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
We've known that for a while.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, he's the head of the game, taking over. He's taken over space.
Mm-hmm.
He's taken over electric vehicles. What else is he taking over? There was something else significant he was doing. I forget what it was.
He's inserted himself into the Ukraine-Russian conflict.
Yep. He's taken over world geopolitical affairs. Mm-hmm. And most recently, he's taking over Twitter.
Take us to Mars.
He's going to do that too, but he's taking over Twitter. So I believe he bought into to be the primary or the major shareholder of Twitter.
Well, it was just disclosed that he already owned a big portion of it.
He did, but I think he bought. I could be getting this wrong. I probably should have looked deeper, but I think I heard he ended up buying 9% of Twitter shares, which I think makes him the major shareholder. So they must have quite diverse in the amount of shareholders. I'm sure it's public But I heard he was actually going further, that he wanted to, I don't know. Last I had heard was he wanted to own it all. Yeah, it was something crazy that he wanted to own it all. Or I don't know if he means all the shares, but I think, maybe that is it. But one of the first things that I found this fascinating, one of the first things that he did when that news came out that he was like major shareholder, so probably he feels like maybe he's going to try to change the course of Twitter, was he put out a poll on Twitter that he asked, do you want an edit button? And I think overwhelmingly it was yes.
Who doesn't want an edit button for life?
Well, Twitter does not give you an edit button.
Right.
Think about it. Facebook, you can edit your posts. Instagram, you can edit your posts. I don't know about the other ones. TikTok, Snapchat, and all those. It's too late once they're out. But Twitter it's always been around as once it goes into Twitterverse, it's permanent. Yeah. And how many people have had things come back to haunt them that they posted 10 years ago? Has it been around 10 years? Maybe 7 years ago that they put on Twitter that they really wish was not out there. Or you see celebrities post something or athletes post something and it doesn't have the best taste. It doesn't, it doesn't sit well and you can't edit it. And it's been retweeted and, you could delete it. But, once there's all these comments and tweets and retweets, you kind of lose the virality of it and what it, So, and then it was interesting because right about the same time that I was thinking, here's a case where somebody really wishes they had edit Adam Schefter, who is kind of the lead reporter for all things NFL news. When the sad news of Dwayne Haskins' death came out, I think a couple weeks ago, week and a half ago, on a Sunday morning, I remember someone just calling.
Dwayne Haskins is?
Dwayne Haskins is a former quarterback for Ohio State University that I think graduated in 2018. Then he went to, had an incredible season with Ohio State. Then he went to Washington football team. Now what are they called? The Washington Commanders.
Huskbacks.
No, not the Huskbacks.
Okay.
The Huskbacks?
What you think? You told me earlier.
No, Washington Commanders. Didn't have the greatest time there. It didn't work very well. Recently, I think, got traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers and was going to try to compete for the starting position. And tragic news, he was crossing an interstate late at night, early in the morning or something, and got hit by a truck. dump truck and killed. 24 years old.
Wow.
I mean, just sad.
Yeah.
And it just, the response here, obviously he's actually from Washington area, but there's a connection with Ohio State. Ever since he was a kid, he wanted to be a quarterback at Ohio State. There's video. It's kind of like, it was sad. I was watching the tribute at the spring game, and they were replaying, just a lot of stuff. He just seemed like an incredible guy. Everybody loved him. But there's video of him when he made a visit to Ohio State when he was 7 years old. There was video of him in the locker room.
Oh,
and he said, I'm going to play football here when I grow up at Ohio State. And he said, you are? What position are you going to play? He said, I'm going to be the quarterback.
Oh, wow.
And he ended up being the quarterback at Ohio State.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, like, he's just, again, when somebody tragically dies at 24 and just Ohio State, if you're a quarterback and they have a good, like, you're beloved anyways.
Yeah.
And so, but Adam Schefter, we're talking like hours after this, as that breaks the news kind of, and his tweet is really, really insensitive, to say the least. Basically something along the lines of Dwayne Haskins, former standout quarterback at Ohio State University, struggling NFL quarterback at Washington, now at Pittsburgh, but dies. And it's almost like but it just was so insensitive. The guy, it is. The guy just died tragically, and you're basically pointing out that he was struggling in the NFL.
Yeah.
And he got just hammered over it, and probably his own bosses, they pay him a lot of money. They probably said, you need to pull that. And so he deleted his tweet. But it made me think about, man, I bet he would have liked to have had an edit button.
But it's interesting that you can delete a tweet but not edit a tweet currently.
Yeah. You've never been able to edit. There's no edit button with Twitter.
So I guess I understand to me the edit button option would have more appeal if you couldn't delete.
Right.
But if you can delete, why wouldn't you just delete whatever you want to edit?
Because you can't delete, but you also in many ways can't go correct something that you put out when you realize, because I don't think Adam Schefter is a bad guy. I think he was reporting and did not consider how this would make many people feel. Yeah. And I think it's kind of more along the lines of when you realize that you said something offensive, or you realize you said something that maybe is taken wrong, or, I didn't mean for that to come out this way. I wasn't trying to offend this group of people. But you know how I guess it also speaks to the climate. I mean, one of the reasons why I got off Twitter years and years ago was because I felt like it was one of the worst negative cesspools in America. Yeah. Or the world.
It feels like the garbage dump of social media to me.
It does. And I know there are some groups that love it. Sports, it's huge for sports still. For
authors, apparently,
we found that out. Authors, it's big. It's like for certain news, it's a quick way to get news and short little doses. But it made me think about this whole idea that as we live our lives and we interact with people and we post things on social media and we do things, there are times when we make mistakes, we make errors, where lapses in judgment. I mean, we all do that. I think we're all prone to say the wrong things, do the wrong things at time. I think that's part of being human, being sinful and being human. And just that very idea of there's no edit, it's there for good. And yeah, you could delete it, but we all know that it's screen grabbed, it's shared. And there's not much you can do about it at that point, at least with an edited version. If somebody goes to point up and go, no, that's not what it says.
Right.
Okay, edited by, that's fine. And so it just kind of made me think, like, our culture is
What do you vote for?
Huh?
Should there be an edit button?
Yes, I didn't go vote because I have an account on Twitter, but I've not used it in forever. And
why should there be an edit button?
Well, I think for the very reason that, first of all, I am so grateful for the edit button on Facebook and Instagram because do you know how many spelling errors or typographical errors that come out of my posts sometimes? Even if I'm not posting them, sometimes they're there. But most of the time,
what does that mean?
That doesn't mean anything. Even if the social media team is using it to post something for me. But no, they do a great job. But I mean, my wife is constantly finding, hey, you had a spelling error.
Your wife and who else?
And my daughter.
And who else?
Constantly, and every once in a while you do.
Oh, okay.
But find that, and so you feel like, I feel like an idiot. That's not what I was trying to say. You tried to revise it, and you go on, and it's nice to be able to edit something because it becomes a reflection of who you are. That's the way it feels.
Yeah.
And so to me, I'm all for it. But I guess I don't know. What are you not for an edit button?
I'm not saying I'm not for an edit button. I I think of it in a couple ways. Number one, because you always compare it to real life, and the truth is, in real life, you don't get an edit button.
You don't. You can only make a new tweet.
Like, I wish I could go back to things in the past and edit that. Don't you
so
wish
good.
you could do that?
Yes.
But in a really real life way, you cannot do that in real life. So you should think even harder before you post something that's out there permanently.
It's a good argument for no edit button.
But I think the argument for it, I'm all about, which is we live in a very graceless climate, where you can't evolve and change, where you could be an incredible person, but if you were in a different place in your journey 10 years ago, people want to find you and catch you in your worst moment and define you by it and crucify you by it. So, in that sense, I get being for the edit button. I think I would be more for editing the graceless judgmentalism of our society so that we don't need an edit button.
Well, I would agree with that.
And so, you know what?
But that's a good argument for not. I mean, I guess, but I don't know that Twitter needs to mirror real life. But in a way, it's an expression of real life.
It does. It's the power of the tongue through the keyboard.
So no edit. Edit button.
I say we do some deeper editing in our society, and maybe that's why we're having these conversations to try to contribute towards that.
Let's talk about it, because here's one thing that I found very fascinating about Twitter, and then it kind of reminds me of a story that I've just been following in Tennessee that I'll bring up.
Tennessee Titans.
Wrong. We're not talking about football here.
Okay.
And
I'm surprised to know that.
I am surprised that you know that, actually.
And the Volunteers.
And the Tennessee Volunteers from college. That's pretty good. What's their color?
Orange.
Very good.
I know that
because
my Tennessee fans friends do not like our Clemson orange colors.
Yeah,
that they ripped off.
I think Tennessee orange is a little better. I think Clemson orange is a little bit brighter.
Ron, are you listening to this?
Yeah, Ron. Papa Moore.
My dad.
Are you listening to this? Sorry, I like the Tennessee orange maybe a little bit. I think it's a little more muted than the Clemson.
They're a very
muted
team. They fade into
That's not
the autumn of history unnoticed.
Okay. But anyways, I think one of the things that I don't like about Twitter, that it exists in Facebook, it exists in Instagram. I mean, we just saw that this past week when following one of the accounts that we like to follow, or just mayhem and whatever, but that was fun. But Twitter seems to mimic some of the worst of our culture in regards to mob mentality.
Mimic or reflects?
Okay, reflects. Mimic. I mean, mimic, same difference. I mean, I don't know if there's any semantics, but it does. It reflects the mob mentality. Like, it's like if one person is offended, then everybody needs to be offended. It's like everybody jumps on an offense, and it's like people just get. And I guess some people might say that is how a culture or a society polices itself.
Yeah, it feels like if there's ever been a cultural moment where it's smelling blood in the water and sharks are all over it, it's now.
Yeah. And I think that mob mentality, I think, has also led us into probably the greatest form of cancel culture we've ever experienced.
Yeah.
Where, and I think that's the big issue that I take a little bit, not necessarily with the edit button, but like you were saying, it feels like there's no room to mess up. To me, that's where the edit button helps.
Yeah.
And I know we can't edit our lives, but in a similar way, it does feel like without an edit button, there's no grace.
There's no way to make things. Maybe you look at the edit button. That's the way to make things right.
Yes, there's no way to even to be able to go back and go, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
And
I've changed.
We know intention, or I've changed. I might have posted that 4 years ago, 5 years ago, which I guess in that regard in Twitter, just go delete it then.
Yeah.
But once it's been retweeted, then I know it'll be there, and it's there. It's once you put something in the universe, the Twitterverse, it's there. Same thing with other forms of social media, and I understand that. But I just think that there's definitely, with the cancel culture we have now, it feels like you make one mistake, and not just the consequences of that mistake, but everybody piles onto it. And next thing you know, you have one lapse in judgment, one failure, and you're done.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like today, doesn't it? In their culture?
It does. It's I mean, I've told you before, especially even in our seats, where there's an entrustment of influence and roles in church, it just feels like this is a cultural moment where there's no room for error or grace, and there's no room to have a past void of imperfection.
Yeah.
I mean, which if you're a human, you have a past littered with some forms of imperfection.
Yep.
In varying degrees. And it just feels like this is a moment where people are just waiting to catch you, waiting to find you and define you by the darkest hour.
Yeah.
Or by who you used to be.
Yeah.
Or by something you didn't even mean. Or by a way that you truly blew it, but you've made amends for. And it's sobering, but also discouraging and a little terrifying. And I think you hinted at it, but there's some real examples right now where it's like, forget the past, in the present. Are we moving? Are we in a? There's a lot of concerns right now in culture we talked about, but I think one of the greatest that has to be a discussion is: are we as a society moving towards a direction where there's zero room to be human? There's zero room for error. There's zero room for imperfection.
Well, or to grow, or to learn. I feel like the way we learn is by we make mistakes. And maybe you never are able to repair a relationship, but hopefully you learned from the damage that you caused in that relationship so you don't do it in the next.
Right.
And I feel like probably the greatest teacher in life is probably failure.
Yeah.
The greatest teacher in life is making mistakes.
Right.
As much as I always want to say, boy, I want to learn from your mistakes so I don't make the same. The truth is, and I think in our human nature, we still are more prone to make our own mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think the real tragedy is not learning from them, obviously. But, there's a fascinating article that I was mentioning that I've been kind of following. My wife is a nurse. My daughter is a nurse. So this kind of hit kind of close to home and something that my wife and my daughter were following very closely. But there was a nurse in Tennessee. And
Redonda Vaught.
Yep. Yeah. Was it Redonda or Rhonda?
Redonda Vaught.
Redonda Vaught. And she made a fatal mistake. And again, when you are working in a medical profession, and not everybody works in this kind of profession where if you make a mistake, and I'm not talking about an intentional, I'm trying to do something, I'm talking about a mistake or an error. But there are people who work in fields that if you make a mistake, it could actually be deadly. And so she made a mistake where she was taking care of a patient and she gave the wrong medicine. There are measures that are usually in place for that. I've heard conflicting reports that the system wasn't working, which when I talk to other nurses, my wife, Gina, that we've had on here before, who is on the nursing board, I think, for Ohio now. Governor asked her to be on it.
Yeah.
I mean,
shout out to Gina.
And when I talk to some nurses, they all know exactly what she's talking about. I feel like that's what's interesting is if you're an outsider looking in, but you are not a medical person, then you will easily just have a perspective based on however the news is reporting it. But if you're a nurse who's worked in that world, you know exactly what she was dealing with. The nurses are already stressed. They're already overworked and have been for the last 2 years. They're massively understaffed. They're moving toward, there's an anticipation of being about a million short of nurses in this country.
And in tandem with that is nurses don't create the systems in the hospitals. No. They step into the systems. And so one of the things that she said is that she did override some of the procedures, but nurses everywhere
they do all the time.
Okay, that's standard procedure is to override the procedures.
Yeah, they have to because the system doesn't work half the time or different things, and they had all kinds of problems with their computer systems.
So this nurse makes a fatal mistake.
Yeah.
75-year-old
woman.
75-year-old woman.
75-year-old woman who's going in for an MRI. She's supposed to give her Versed, gives her Vericonium.
Paralyzes.
It's a paralyzing drug, and she ends up basically brain dead within a day, I think, or before she even goes in. But I will say, the nurse, when she realized it,
owned it.
She reported it. She didn't just own it; she reported it. When she realized it, and that is something that they're taught in the nursing profession. They are taught that if you make a mistake, report it. Everybody makes mistakes. It's more important that you report it and that we address it, that you will not be in trouble. That is the message that hospitals and things are trying to give nurses. She did the right thing. She reported it. She did the wrong thing by giving the wrong medication.
Right.
That was not an intentional thing. She was not trying to kill this person. It was an accident.
Yeah.
that I believe I even thought it was a floor that she doesn't normally work on.
Yep.
A bunch of other things, and so she ends up the hospital. She ends up losing her job. If I recall, she lost her job. She ended up finding another job.
Ironically, she's not lost her license.
She had not lost her license. What also happened, interestingly enough, is Vanderbilt, who had 2 examiners, when they announced cause of death, did not say that it was specifically giving her that medicine.
Yeah.
Why they would do that, not so sure. It's almost like scientifically we can't prove it, but it also seems like maybe so you don't have to, so you could sweep it under the rug, which is what some people think Vanderbilt Hospital did. And I had heard that the family had forgiven her, that she had
they didn't press
charges. That ended up being a nursing board review when they found out about it and reviewed it a year and a half later. Ended up taking away her license. And then shortly after that, the district attorney gets wind of it. I don't know how. Maybe they submitted all that stuff to the district, and the district attorney had just gone after her. Mm-hmm. Which, oddly enough, the district attorney was also a professor at Vanderbilt University. So it's like, is there a conflict of interest? And the sad thing is the hospital is not being held liable. Now, what typically they have for nurses as a protection is that there have always been civil lawsuits that tend to happen. Usually when wrongful death things happen, there's civil lawsuits that get settled. There are consequences of you can lose your job, you can do all of that. But rarely, if ever, before, for a mistake like this, has there been criminal charges. And March 25th, she was convicted of negligent homicide and another, I forget what the other one was. And originally it said she could face up to 12 years in prison. May end up only being about 8 or 9, but still pretty awful. And an interview she did, I thought this was so fascinating to me. She said, because here's the real concern. There have been nursing boards, national nursing communities, other people have chimed in and said this is setting a really, really dangerous precedent. Nurses are going to hide errors or mistakes because if you report it, you're incriminating yourself. That there are nurses, doctors, they're going to be like, this is why am I taking all this risk for what I'm getting paid?
Yeah.
I'm trying to take care of patients. I make a mistake. Now, I do think that we have to live in a world where there's consequences even for mistakes. I'm not saying there shouldn't be consequences, that maybe she should lose her job.
Right.
Maybe she should lose her license, or maybe there should be a way for her to, after time, be able to get her license back again. Who knows? I mean, I just think we live in a society where it's like, it's almost becoming one and done. I guess that's the point.
Yeah, you make a mistake.
You make a mistake, we're done.
And it's dangerous on so many levels. I think, and going back to one of the things you said, there's been, because of the resonance of of how broken the system is and what nurses go through, combined with the fear of what kind of a dangerous precedent this is, there's been an unbelievable outpouring of support and love for her.
Oh, yeah.
They said in 2 weeks, over $75,000 were raised for legal fees. And then nurses from different states have poured in to follow her behind in the court and all kind of things. But I just think, going back to what we said earlier, in every profession, it seems like, but I know specifically in this moment in hospital systems, you are creating an environment. Whenever you create a culture where honesty is penalized, whenever you create a culture where there's zero grace and zero tolerance for human error, you're creating a really, really dangerous and unhealthy culture. Where I heard one of the nurses say, it's tragic because it's so sticky because you can't underestimate, you can't overstate the severity on one end. Someone lost their life.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine. I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. My parents in their mid to late 70s. I put myself in their shoes like, you can't overestimate how devastating that is. However, if you create a culture where people don't report because the fear of repercussions, then you're actually inviting a culture where there's going to be more deaths.
Oh, yeah. More errors,
more deaths. And so I just think you look at this and you're just like, okay, like you said, there has to be consequences. But there's one thing for there to be consequences, you be fired, or for there to be a rehabilitation process, there to be a restoration process. It's another thing to say, okay, you made an error. She owned it. She reported it. She's obviously emotionally distraught over it.
Yeah.
So she's already facing the consequences of losing her job. She's already facing the consequences of being in the prison of her guilt for the rest of her life, knowing that she was responsible for the death of this patient.
She said, I wake up every day and I know that it's because of me.
But to pursue someone in the medical profession as if they were a criminal and had criminal intent.
That's the hard thing to deal with, is to say that it was, even though it's negligent, like what, manslaughter, homicide, but it's really hard. And here's the thing. One person said this, that they said it seems unfair. Here's what they said. We are, in our society, one of our rights that we're given is to have a jury of our peers. They're like, if you want to have a jury of her peers, let her have a jury of ICU nurses.
Yeah.
Because if you don't work in that environment, you don't know the stress. I think it's the same thing. I feel like, I just think this is one example that correlates to a lot of situations. We were talking earlier about the woman, the police officer that was trying to tase or stun someone at a traffic stop.
Yeah.
And she even said, I'm going to tase you, I'm going to tase you. Yeah. And then she pulled out her wrong weapon. She pulled out her handgun and she shot him by accident.
Yeah,
I mean, it seems like I've seen the video of it, and she is immediately in remorse. I mean, on the side, like just hand in her head's like, "Oh my gosh, what did I do?" And she killed the guy.
Yeah,
and I don't think it was intentional that that she killed the guy.
No,
but she's now facing. I don't think the trial's happened yet. But
it's 2 years. She'll be in prison 2 years. She was convicted in February.
She was. Okay, so she was
convicted. So this, I told you, this reminds me of it's such a weird moment we're in, and it's nuanced by all these other factors.
Yeah,
because I feel like whatever I'm about to say will probably offend either side.
Yeah.
But
if it does, send an email to Russ.Moore at.
I over the last few years, I've been on my own journey over the last 5 to 7 years of really trying to educate myself and empathize with the injustice that the Black community has faced over the years. And every police officer I personally know is amazing, but I do believe that police reform is needed, and I do believe that there has been a long, murky, complicated history of relationship of the Black community and police, and we come over the last few years, everything that happened with George Floyd, and so I say that to say you can't separate that this happened not only in the middle of the great greatest civil rights movement since the 60s, but this happened literally in the vicinity of where George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin.
Yeah.
And so there's so many factors you can't separate. Sure. But what's tough is there's got to be in the middle of movements that are moral and right and true, there's got to be enough thoughtful consideration of each circumstance.
Yeah.
To not be blinded by emotion, but to not go from one extreme wrong ditch and then land in another ditch. Because when I look at this situation, Kim Potter is at a traffic stop, and she over and over again yells taser, 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 and then pulls a gun, shoots. And I actually watched the video again about an hour ago. The moment she shoots, she realizes she shoots, falls to the ground, and is bawling, crying, saying, "I just shot someone."
Yeah.
So it's not like later on she broke down on the stand too. But in the moment she realized she did that, she said, she cussed.
Holy what?
She cussed.
Oh, okay.
And just started, distraught, panic attack that she accidentally shot someone. Now again, this is so complex because this is not only in the middle of everything going on with racial tensions, everything going on between police and the Black community, but this is also happening in a similar situation to the hospital system where someone has lost their life.
Yeah.
So someone has lost their life, and the severity of consequences, in a way, has to match has to at least correlate somehow with the severity of what happened. And in this case, it was fatal. It was a fatal error.
Yeah.
However, this is someone who immediately owned it. I think she resigned.
Yep.
She reported it. And so for her to be pursued as a criminal who went out of her way to try to kill someone, I just think eventually we have to ask the question, is there a human occupation that is impervious to human error?
Right. No, we need robots to do everything.
Because until the day we have robots,
that's what we need. AR.
There's got to be now again, you have to nuance this. Does that mean that in the hospital system and in the police system, we in these moments should not take a serious look and say,
sure.
hey, not only are there consequences for the person, but where do we really need to look at the broken factors in the system?
Right.
Where do we really need to up training? Where do we really need to take a really hard, long look to make sure this never, ever happens again?
Right.
That the response needs to be serious. These are human, especially the higher the level of occupation, the higher the stakes, the higher the consequences and potential consequences. So you have to say, we're going to take a really long, hard look. This isn't sweep it under the rug. This isn't just off my shoulders. Yeah. But at the same time, if we're going to have occupations where people are putting their lives on the line, if we're going to have occupations where their whole job is to care for people's lives in the hospital system, then there historically has been an understanding of there's an umbrella that human error is going to happen. And so, but where are we headed where it seems like in these occupations, if you make one error, you're gone, and there's going to be this trickle effect of fear of people are going to be so in their heads in the hospitals and in real life situations with police that there's going to be
it's hard though, because I also understand like what you were saying, especially the one of the police one, because there's always been kind of a level of immunity that doesn't seem like it's fair or aptly applied in some situations.
Which is very true. Which is fair.
That's why I agree. Every situation is individual. Yeah. And I think even the district attorney against Vaught down in Tennessee said this is not an indictment of the nursing community, and that's not how the nursing community feels.
Oh, no.
Right? They said this is one person who's
negligent. He said, well, this is gross. He said, this isn't me penalizing somebody because of an error. This is a pattern of gross neglect.
Yeah, and it's
which they're like, no, these are...
It's not a pattern of gross neglect.
Yeah.
So it is. This is a very complicated thing that we're obviously trying to like weave in. I think the overarching question that we're kind of getting to is like, how do we find in society an appropriate balance where we understand there's consequences for things that we do, but there's not mob mentality where there's zero grace, where we can, I mean, we can get into a whole nother conversation we shouldn't hear, but just even talking to people who've been in prison, there's zero reform. That's not what prison's for. I mean, you talk to prisoners, we know that. There's not reform.
There's no rehabilitation.
There's no rehabilitation. And so
we already have an overcrowded prison system compared to the rest of the world.
Where is there space for grace in our community, in our society? I think that's a great question, because I think you can apply this. There's so many professions. I mean, we can apply this to our profession too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Pastor makes a mistake. Mm-hmm. Okay. It could be a severe one. It could be that he had an affair. Mm-hmm. It could be whatever. You know, what is the response of the eldership? What's the response of the board? What's the response of that community? Is it one where you messed up, you're done?
Right.
And maybe in that community it is, or is it you messed up? And I understand. That's why I think one of the things that we're trying to discuss in the nuance is every situation, every scenario should be a little bit different.
Right.
Every situation should be judged based on the information, the facts of what's doing, you know. And it just would be nice that there was an appropriate application of consequence based upon the remorse of the person, based upon the circumstances of she reported it.
Right.
Both, what I mean? That this nurse reported it. Wasn't she got caught hiding it, making sure nobody, but when everybody traced it, they found out that she was the problem, and then she admitted it. You do that to me, like, now you maybe have done the greater sin, which wasn't administering the wrong medicine, but trying to hide it.
Like, are we going to pretend that, like, for centuries and millennia, doctors haven't made mistakes?
Oh,
and nurses haven't made mistakes?
Happens all the time, but
are we going to pretend there's any doctor that hasn't made a mistake?
No, but what happens is insurance companies, they just settle out of court and they give people money because of the wrongful death.
Right.
This is one of the first times where we're actually seeing a medical person being criminally charged and probably spending upwards of 8 or more years in prison because she made a mistake.
And a short-staffed hospital system that's already overworked. How many nurses are gonna quit? Mm-hmm. How many people are rethinking their career choice now?
It is, and so I think just I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't know if I have any just kind of like real insight on how to do this. I just think that we have to be careful of the mob mentality of like social media we were talking about. I think also exists just in general culture that you make a mistake, one and done. And I just think that the leaders in these communities, the leaders in these environments need to. This is where we need people to lead and to say, hey, we're going to do what's right here. Yeah. Based on the law, based on whatever. We're going to do whatever is right. And maybe some of these people would say these things are based on law. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like the punishment fits the crime in some of these situations.
Yeah, and it feels like, I think I mentioned this to you earlier, I think a question that's worth asking is when you look at whether it's Kim Potter in the police department or whether it's Rodon DeVault in the hospital system, is the crime being given based on a sincere conscience of justice or based on the pressure of the cultural moment?
Yeah.
Because we live in
political pressure in
a
all
moment
these.
of extreme pressure.
Yeah.
Extreme issues and agendas are hot button topics in the moment. And you have a climate of pressure, a climate of cancel culture, a climate of, this is not nearly as serious as the two things we're talking about, but I even look at, with the Academy Awards when they finally, with Will Smith.
Oh, yeah.
10 years.
What is that, 10-year ban?
10-year ban, which, whatever. But I honestly think if the world hadn't exploded on the scene.
Probably wouldn't have been in that.
No. Hey, we're going to revoke whatever. You're banned for a year, maybe. I think we're in a real, and I'm a hopeless optimist, so this sounds, I'm not trying to be a pessimist, but I just think we're in a real cultural moment where society and leadership and people are going to have to decide, to make judgments and decisions based on right and based on justice and wisdom and not based on the current political moral climate pressure.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I just think we're heading to a crescendo where cancel culture is getting to a peak and people are just going to have to decide. And to me, one of the easiest ways to rid yourself of cancel culture is to look in the mirror. Sure. That's what amazes me. For all my faults, and I have a lot of faults, there's no part of me.
I'm just kidding.
Not as many as. But okay. I got way more than you. But there's no part of me that wants to try to find people, celebrities or people I know, and just tear them apart and find an old tweet and pick out their one imperfection. Because I'm like, I know me. I don't want that done to me.
Yeah.
And there's got to be
Doesn't it seem like that social media has massively heightened the climate of cancel culture?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that has been a massive trigger for the pressure.
Yeah.
We've seen that. I remember just as another sidebar one, but I remember Greg Schiano, who was an assistant defensive coach at Ohio State for years. I think he's back at Rutgers now. I might be wrong on that, but University of Tennessee was actually going to hire him to be their head coach years ago. Information came out that he supposedly, I can't remember this, sports people would probably remember, either he said or he tweeted something or he did something that was taken to be either, it wasn't racist, but I don't know, there was something that he did or said, I think it was said, that was taken to be that way years back and was not indicative from what I'd heard of everybody who worked around him, every football player that served under him was not indicative of the way it was being presented.
Yeah.
But the over the weekend, the social media outcry of you better not hire this guy because of something like he said or tweeted or posted years and years before on there, they end up rescinding the offer. And he didn't get the job.
Wow.
And so this political, I want to say political, this like even, I don't know how you want to call
It's
it,
like
the cultural pressure.
It's like a social contract of life. And what's funny is it's like a social contract of certain values.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Whatever.
Like someone can sleep around and have no moral sexually.
No big deal. But
if it's
you made a comment that was off color at one time, again, not good, but if you did, then you're done.
Yeah.
And you can't learn from it.
Yeah.
You can't have grown.
Right.
You can't be a different person now than you were 5 or 10 years ago. Like if they go back in the archives and find that you said or did something, well, you're done today. And I think the tragedy in that is that doesn't leave room for us to grow. Yeah. And I think that I know I have grown. I've changed over the last 5 years, 10 years. Even just what I think about culture, what I think about life has changed the more I have been around people, the more I'm growing, the more empathetic I'm getting, the more like I've changed. And it's like I'd hate to be held to whatever standard I thought I operated by 10 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Like I'm not the same person.
Yeah. And I mean, if we're just gonna kind of wallow on this soapbox for a minute, let's just really focus on the fact that it's not even just limited to the present, but to the past. We're going into the past currently as a society to cancel all of our past heroes.
Yeah.
George Washington. I mean, we're in the middle of canceling George Washington.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of canceling. I mean, I think about the fact, going back to the church scenario, I'm like, none of our heroes, would any of them, besides maybe Joseph, Daniel, and Jesus, I told you those are my three, that I'm like, you can't really find anything on them. Besides those three, maybe one or two others. Like,
I mean, David would have definitely been cut.
David would have been
canceled.
Moses would
have been canceled.
For sure. Moses.
Jonah.
Killed a dude. Canceled. David. Adultery and murder. Like, would any of those have... Peter. And I know it's a different time and there's different contexts and all those kind of things, but, I mean, when can we... Here's maybe just I don't know, it's not a rhetorical question, but just for reflection. Are we in a season of self-loathing where we're everything that... Are we canceling the world because we're canceling ourselves? Like, are we in a season... I mean, if it's true that the way you perceive the world is your projection of your internal world, is the reason that we can't... It almost seems like it's a combination of we're not looking inside to our own faults, and at the same time, could it also be that we are so unhappy with ourselves that we are finding a way to just find anything to destroy each other? But I think about this verse in the New Testament where Paul said, I think it was in 1 Corinthians, I'm not sure, but he said, he was talking about loving each other and humbly serving each other. And he said, don't devour each other or you will be devoured.
Yeah.
And I feel like we are in a cultural moment where there's not to be all, I'm not going to go eschatological end times, but it says in the last days, the love of many will grow cold. Yeah. And it just seems like we're in a cultural moment of devouring each other. Yeah. And the problem is if you devour others, you will be devoured.
Yeah.
And so are we in a place where we can't just... I want to be the kind of person that is not disillusioned. I have no illusions that you're Jesus. I have no illusions that any of my heroes in the past were Jesus, besides Jesus. And I want to be the kind of person that can look around. If somebody does something egregious, there needs to be consequences. We've got to have both mercy and justice. There's got to be attention to both. But at the same time, I just want to be able to... I want to be able to look back. If it's from a political standpoint, I want to be able to look back at George Washington and say, hey, this guy lived in a time where it was almost impossible to rise above racism. That's no excuse. So I condemn that evil. Thank God, look how far we've come as a country. Yeah. But you know what? I can celebrate what he did do in founding this country. Yeah. I want to be able to look back at my spiritual heroes and say, hey, I can learn from that mistake. Hey, I'm so glad we've grown in this aspect, but I can learn from him. Yeah. I can learn from her. I can celebrate that. Yeah. And I hope that we're just rising to such a crescendo and peak to where eventually we've got to come back down from it. Yeah. My hope is we begin to cancel those who cancel.
How are we going to do that? Cancel those who cancel. That's it. We're going to cancel culture. Well, I agree. I just don't think the message of Jesus. I feel like cancel culture in Christian terms. Let's just I would compare to the word condemnation. And I think about how even Romans 8:1 says there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. In other words, it's not that they don't make mistakes. It's not that there aren't people who have done really awful things. Yeah. It's just that there is room for forgiveness. and there is space for grace.
Yeah.
And so because of that, he wants to lovingly lead us to, it's his kindness that leads us to repentance. And so there's a sense of just seeing that. I think that the cancel culture too, what I think, I agree with what you said, and the fact that we're picking, it's whatever the cultural temperament is to choose what we are going to condemn. And I think what I have seen exist both in the church and in culture is, this is what we do humanly, is we tend to condemn that which we don't struggle with.
Yeah.
So the church has always been like that. Oh, I don't struggle with that sin, but you do.
Yeah.
That is the worst sin there is. And it's so easy in our culture that if there's one thing that if this person, and this is where empathy always helps to go, I don't know what it was like growing up in their shoes. I don't know what it was like growing up or what they experienced growing up. So I always want to be empathetic. But the idea that I think cancel culture is whatever the collective climate is of the topics or of the things that maybe someone doesn't struggle with, but they're going to crucify someone else who does struggle with it. And if we could just be reminded today of that the mob mentality is what killed Jesus. Right? The mob mentality. So when you think about it, it's fascinating. As what time we're recording this, we just finished Easter. And that whole week and what it represents was Jesus first coming into the town of Jerusalem, and the whole mob is all praising him. By Friday, because of the few leaders that incited the mob. And how many places in the New Testament do you read where, I was just reading that, where everybody was enthralled by this message until a few people came and incited the mob, and then they kicked them out. And the same thing happened. That here we got, you even have Pontius Pilate who's washing his hands, go, I don't see anything wrong with this man. But because of the pressure of the mob, he ends up having Jesus executed. If there's not an example of where we should not allow the mob on social media or whatever dictate doing what's right. We should do what's right because it's right in every circumstance. And so whether it's Kim Potter, whether it's Vaught, whether it's all of them, to me it's all about what is right and trying to be, and injustice is part of the cry that we've heard for so long in this movement that's going on. But we can, as you said, get so far on the other side that we're creating injustice in the other direction on things that crime doesn't seem to fit.
And it's so true. And I think, and because we live in a time and space where we are by pressure demanded to care about so many things and to prove it by a post. And I think so much of this cancel culture and so much of the mob mentality, not only does it cause us to run in other equally unhealthy extremes, but it also causes us to superficially react instead of deeply respond. Like there are people I know people who have deeply cared about injustice, racism for years and decades, but they're barely on social media, so they didn't do a post and they almost got canceled. And there's other people that the truth is, let's just be honest, there's probably a lot of people that have not spent any time in prayer over injustice, have not done the hard work to build bridges of racial reconciliation, have not served, have not done anything, but they were on trend with posting in the right moments. And if we are pressured, not only will we make unjust judgments, but if we're pressured in an unhealthy way, we will always just react instead of respond. There are companies and individuals that, because of what society has gone through over the last few years and their own awakening, their own eyes being opened, their own hearts of empathy being deepened, are actually taking time to deeply and more sustainably respond. And I want to be the person that at the end of the day isn't rash in reaction, but is deep and wise in response.
And
I just think it's really important. And I think, I don't know, because I think we're probably scratching for, okay, what do we even do about it? But I think what you said is so good. And I just think on a personal level, if it's true that our inner worlds create our outer worlds, then here's a practical thing I can do. Paul said in the New Testament to make allowances for each other's faults. My relationships are healthy when I make allowances for each other's faults. They're frustrated and unhealthy when I want to pick apart and be petty and critical. And there's this verse one time that I was just like, oh, that's a good reminder. It says, this is Paul talking to Timothy. He said, the servant of God must not be quarrelsome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a lot of commands in the New Testament, but we don't think about that.
No.
But he said the servant of God must not be quarrelsome.
That's specifically for Twitter.
That's specifically
2,000 years before.
And when it comes to catching each other's in each other's faults, it says in Romans, Paul said, I'm just quoting Paul, but Paul said, I'll paraphrase, when you see someone fall, restore them in a spirit of gentleness.
Restore them gently.
Looking to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so the healthy human response that hopefully more and more of us can walk in that will transform the cultural response is to have enough humility and self-awareness to be mindful of my own past, my own flaws, my own inclinations, my own tendencies, my own, hey, that could have been me.
Yeah.
And then in a spirit of gentleness say, hey, instead of making a point, how can I continue to try to make a difference?
Yeah.
And by the way, the more severe the penalty and the crime, the more serious the consequences need to be. But let's give healthy weight and measure to fix systems and give consequences and not criminalize people that make mistakes.
Yeah.
We are moving towards an unhealthy cliff if we penalize people, if we criminalize people instead of penalize.
Yeah.
Let's penalize error. Let's criminalize crime.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think that's very well said. I think that was the crux of this conversation. And so there is no edit button in life, and there's I think currently no edit button in Twitter. Although there might become one, who knows? But I do think that's a great point. We should penalize error, but don't sorry, is that right? Yeah, penalize error, but don't
penalize error, criminalize crime.
Yeah, and that's what we should land on. And again, I think most people would say that's justice and that's what we want, but we know we don't live in a world of justice, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think, too, the last thing I'd say is maybe this conversation for anybody that's watching or listening should be, and that's why we kind of have these conversations. I mean, we don't, let's face it, two blowhards here that we can't solve anything in this world, and we're not here to. I called you a blowhard.
Oh, okay.
Have you heard that phrase? Is that not appropriate for what we do? Yeah, it's an old phrase. It just means two loudmouth talkers that really have probably not that much to say. But I mean, we're not solving anything by our conversation. If anything, hopefully we're bringing all of us to a point of reflection to look at ourselves and say, let's not participate in mob mentality.
Yeah,
whether social media or otherwise. And let's always make sure that there is room for grace for people, especially ones who are owning. I mean, you can tell a difference between somebody who does something egregious, who does something and they don't own it, and they're trying to get out of it, and they don't have any sense of remorse or guilt except for getting caught.
Yeah,
you can see that. You don't see that with that nurse.
No,
you don't see that with that police officer.
No,
that is the weight of what they've done. Weighs on them heavily. And that's when you can tell they made a mistake.
Yeah.
And we should not crucify them because they made a mistake.
Yeah. This is a good heart check. No matter what somebody's messed up with, if your desire is to remove all hopefulness from their future, that's an issue.
Yeah.
No matter what someone's done, I'm here because there's hope.
Yeah.
And I want someone, no matter when all is said and done, when just judgments have been handed out, I want anybody that still has a heartbeat, I want them to know there's hope.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know what that looks like, and it's easier said than done, but I think the only thing we can do is control what we post.
Yeah. Because
there's no edit button.
Yeah.
And I think maybe even a better litmus test for us all is not, will I get an edit button, or if I made someone mad, can I edit this post or can I delete it? I think maybe we should think of it like this. Is what I'm posting, does it honor God?
Yeah, that's good.
Does it honor God? Who cares if anybody else sees it?
Right.
And what if there is, and even if there is an edit button, doesn't matter. He knew what we posted the first time and why we posted it. You know what I mean? So I think at the end of the day, I think that's the heart check in all of this. And it's kind of sad to see what's going on. My wife, again, as a nurse, and my daughter, they're looking at that going, why would I want to stay in this if you're thinking about going into a field like that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think same thing, law enforcement. Why would you want it? It's such a dangerous field to be in to begin with. And yet, sadly, we need good law enforcement officers in our country. We need people that, you know what I mean, want to be there for the right reasons. The same thing is true with doctors, nurses. We want people that want to be there for the right reasons, to serve and to take care of people and to try to do the right thing in very difficult circumstances.
Right. And you want, again, I mean, I know we're just continuing to nuance it, but you want the tension, I mean, going back to law enforcement, you want, where the system's broken, you want it to be repaired.
Yeah. Where
there's racism, you want that to be removed. Where there needs to be fresh training, obviously we know prison needs a whole lot of reform.
Yeah.
But I want police officers that are integrous, that have an equal amount of dignity for all race and all people, that are trained properly. But having taken that for granted, you don't want people in life or death situations that are stuck in their head second guess themselves. Because of fear.
That's what police officers or that's what nurses will
like
now tell you.
Those both matter.
They both matter.
That matters and for both police. Yeah. So
and I want to say this. I think the same. It's funny the parallels, but I think a majority of police officers you ever meet are incredible people. I know many of them personally.
All the ones I personally know
they're incredible. Like they're the kind of people that, to me, I'm so grateful to have them. They're also the ones who are willing to go into the face of fire. They're the ones firefighters. They're the ones that are willing to run into places everybody else leaves.
Right.
I mean, the job they have is so incredibly challenging. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah.
And so I think the same is true of nurses. Like every nurse I know seems to be so deeply caring. They don't get into it for the money. Same thing with police officers. They don't get in it for the money. And so I think in general we know that doesn't mean that there's not systems that are broken that need to be addressed.
Right.
And doesn't mean that there's not some bad ones here and there.
Yeah.
You know, but we need to be careful we don't penalize the whole.
Right.
Or criminalize the whole.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because of that.
Not every politician is corrupt.
Yeah.
Not every pastor's a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Not every police officer is racist.
Well, we're all kind of hypocrites.
And not all, you know,
but, you know.
You just preached on hypocrisy.
Yeah, a while ago. We're all kind of hypocrites in a little bit. But yes, I understand what you're saying.
That's the quote I like, heard a few years ago.
No.
Hypocrisy. Is our friend, but Erwin McManus.
Yeah, he's my good friend.
Yeah, he said.
I chat with him every once in a while.
He said, all of us that are authentically struggling to follow Jesus, if we're really honest, all of us are hypocrites in transition.
Yeah. And that's
like that.
And that's so good. That's what we're trying to be. I mean, we're trying to be not hypocrites, but transition to honest people who are trying to do it. And I just think we just got to be careful we don't remove the incentive to be honest.
Yes.
In our culture. That's the dangerous thing. That's almost that dangerous precedent that's being set right now in our culture, and I think that is dangerous. So anyways, fascinating conversation. I'm sure probably even some of you watching and listening, this may draw up comments, thoughts. We always love to know them. I mean, even if there's stuff that we say that you don't like, that's fine. I mean, we're big boys.
Hey, cool story though. So last week we released inspiring episode.
Yes.
Conan, Brock, me.
You
inspiring.
I'm going to just talk about all the races that we've run. And
so
I've done a lot of endurance things myself.
So someone I know who lives in Atlanta, been going through kind of a tough time, and didn't have anybody go with to church on Easter, and so was not going to go, but ended up going. Said that day was life-changing for them.
Oh, that's cool.
But said the reason they went is for whatever reason they had watched the podcast, woke up, and this is not a pat on my back because it could have been anybody saying this.
Sounds like it is.
But the clip that was posted on Instagram
was you talking.
Woke up and it was the whole thought of the best weeks are the weeks you do hard things.
Hard things, yeah.
And literally that quote was like, and after thinking that, I was like, I need to get to church.
Oh, that's cool.
And then literally drove to a church nearby and said it was a life-changing day for them.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so who knows?
Hey, maybe one little thing that was said will inspire you and encourage you.
So if these inspire you,
let us know.
Let us know. Share them with people.
Yeah. Share it with someone else.
Yeah. And send us, let us know what's inspiring you, and then let us know questions you have, other topics.
Yeah, you can send an email always to podcast@thex.church. You can leave comments. You can share it. You can review it. Helps it as well. Just helps the algorithm. So, good conversation.
Yeah.
I enjoy processing. That's a lot of what we do.
Yeah.
We don't, aren't solving the world's problems, but we're just trying to process what culture is going through. And
maybe this table, we can't cure society, but we can contribute to it.
Hey, I like that. We can't cure it, but we can contribute to it.
Yeah, so let's all be people that do that through how we think.
I love that.
Talk.
That's good. At this table, we can't cure society, but we can contribute to it.
Yeah.
So anyways, hopefully you've been encouraged today and inspired and challenged as well. And again, let us know if you do. It's great having you with us. We'll see you next week.